This is Justin Kindle from the Craft Brewers Conference. I'm joined by my colleagues, Jess Infante.
Hello, how are you?
And Zoe Licata.
Hello.
I'm doing well. And first question I've got for our guest, Bart Watson, the VP of Strategy and Chief Economist for the Brewers Association, is a vibe check. How you feeling about this year's CBC?
Feel great. It happened. We got people here. Walking around the trade show, expo floor, vendors seem really excited with the traffic. Brewers I've talked to are excited to be here, have the community. I've heard really good things about the seminars. We'll see what the final scores come back, but a lot of positivity there. So it's always just so great to have so many of our members, so much of the community in one place, and I get a lot of energy from CBC. So vibe check's positive.
Well, you heard it here first. The vibes are good. Bart, I think you did a great job in your State of the Industry talk yesterday at keeping the vibes on the level. I think it's been a rough year. Craft volume was down for the first time other than 2020, which I think we've all agreed to completely throw out. But there is reason for optimism. There's reason for positivity. What are a couple of the bright spots that you think our audience should know about?
Yeah, and you're right. I tried to lay out the challenges as well. You can't discard those. That's a part of the environment right now. But some of the positivity that I tried to inject was that there are a lot of growth stories out there. It's not universal. The category as a whole is down, but craft's made up of so many individual companies, and many of them are finding success. I think one of the other things is a lot of companies are doing the hard work they need to set themselves up for business success. I remember reading Jim Cook's book years ago, and he talked about how you can grow without growing. And in periods of slow product growth, that's a great time to invest in company growth. So that gives me some optimism. And then finally, I tried to do a lot of putting the numbers in context. It's a challenging time to be a small business. It's a challenging time for a lot of parts of beverage and beverage alcohol. And craft brewers the numbers aren't, as I said yesterday, the numbers aren't necessarily good, but they aren't what I call bad either. Once you take all that context into account, I think a lot of brewers or the category in general is actually holding up surprisingly well.
You all right there?
I was
Sorry.
distracted by it.
I'm being distracted.
The excited face.
Well, I think it's actually worth mentioning who's distracting me, because it was Don Bixel, founder of 3 Tier Beverages, which offers BA members a really helpful data dashboard.
Yeah, check out if you're a BA member, check out our 3-tier dashboard on the stats and data section of our website. Awesome intro to scan data from Nielsen IQ.
So the BA recently promoted you. They added to your title, VP of Strategy. What does that entail?
Sounds really fancy, doesn't it?
It does.
I think we brought also Matt on board. Super excited to have Matt Gasiak on as staff economist, which just frees my time to think a little bit more broadly. So we're still defining some of that, what it means. But I think it's looking at where the BA moves relative to our members. I talked about this a little bit in the talk yesterday as well, but we're thinking about how we support our members' holistic businesses right now, and I think that's a little more complex than it used to be, because that's evolving so much. We didn't have members producing across beverage alcohol. We didn't have members who were doing all these different things, and so I think that strategy is, what is our strategy in relation to what we offer that help our members succeed, and so it's evolved from I was the stats and data guy to I think I'm thinking of a little bit more holistically, and having those conversations too, with other industry associations, with other partners, about how can we deliver insights, resources, and value to our members, because that's a core of what we do, and that needs to change as our members change.
And something that's jumped out to me just walking the trade show floor is there's a lot of stills. That's really interesting. Is this is this new?
They've been here, so we've allowed those suppliers to bring those products, but I think you are seeing it level up. And I referenced the 600 breweries holding distilled spirits permits yesterday. That's been growing pretty rapidly. We've actually looked at this before, and it hasn't ever been high enough for me to call out. So the suppliers are evolving too with the needs of our members as they, some of them become, it's not everyone, but some of them become total beverage companies. And that's going to be interesting to watch and interesting to think about how we support that, because, we're there for our members.
I really liked when you brought up yesterday, in the vein of kind of redefining what growth is, that story of someone who came up to you and they were they weren't saying oh, we expanded to all these new places. They were talking about other developments in their business. Is like, can you talk more just like about what those conversations, how they've evolved?
Yeah, and some members always did this, right? There's always been members who have really geeked out, not on the beer side, but on the like manufacturing and operations side. But I've just noticed that a lot more, that, having conversations with members, which I always try in the run up to this and as our stats are coming in, to get some of that context, right? You can see the numbers, but a plus 3% can mean really different things for different members. And so getting into, what does that mean for individual businesses? And this year when I did that, members know what the landscape looks like. They know it's competitive. And instead of just immediately being like, well, here's the brand that grew for us, a lot of them just turned to business stuff really quickly. Like, hey, we had huge grain costs. So, this member talked about the co-op they had formed with another brewery. And I found that really interesting, and I saw it repeated over and over and over, that, you get members on the horn, and I don't call I do call some of the ones who had, plus 30% years, and they're talking about brands and what they did there. But a lot of the ones who were kind of more, up a little bit, down a little bit, it was really a business focus that they brought. And that's awesome. That's, and that's a place too that we're thinking about. What are the business resources? How can we up, we had the financial workshop again this year for the second year in a row. How can we up some of that financial and business literacy? Because that's going to make a huge difference for companies going forward, is just how do you manage your resources more effectively in a market that's not going to grow, so you can't just grow your way out of it like you could 5 years ago.
One of the things that I've heard you talk about a couple of times now, at least, is the need for reinvention. And, you can't just have an industrial space, throw out, some kegs and, hard-ass chairs and all that, that model has been done. And I think we all sort of look at like Talea as an example that has done that well, but I'd throw it back to you. Like, who else do you think is offering an experience out there right now that has really impressed you?
That's a great question. That's a piece I need to get on the road a little bit more and check out some of the new things that people are doing. I'll say with our local breweries, I see them going in a bunch of different directions, so it's hard to nail down one. But I think the diversity of the models, that hospitality piece in particular, has really gone up in the last couple of years as, breweries have realized, if I'm doing the same thing as every other brewery, in Front Range of Colorado, where I visit the most breweries, a lot of them did look alike 5 or 10 years ago, and I think they figured out that's a recipe for getting the same customers and, splitting the pie too many ways to actually be successful. So I'll call out just one super crazy fun one. There's a brewery in Denver called Arms. I know those guys well. They do a great job. And a couple years back, they brought in something that apparently people do on the East Coast, where they just decorated their tap room super crazy for Christmas. Glittery pink Christmas trees hanging from the ceiling, and I don't think anybody in Denver had ever seen it before, and it just, it was gangbusters for them. And they were getting the people who this is a tradition, I guess, on the East Coast. I see people nodding, coming in and, making it feel like home. And those are the kind of things where we took for granted the beer was enough to get people through the doors. And that's not always the case anymore. It is if you really, really stand out, but there's so many people who stand out that it's hard for that to be a differentiator. So you just see people doing more interesting stuff over time, and that's great to see.
Yeah, the overly decorating for various holidays, that's like just a byproduct of everything has to happen on Instagram, or else it didn't happen at all.
Yeah.
Which is depressing. But also, if it gets people in the door, hey, do it. I think something that breweries are really great at is being like a community center and hosting events. Like, I recently joined a book club. Zoe did too. I joined a book club that's mostly, new moms in my area, and we visit a different brewery every month and read a book. And you're hanging out at
Castle Island, South Boston location, once a month with a bunch of random 20-something-year-old women, mainly just hanging out. I would go to Castle Island maybe once every 3-4 months if I wasn't doing that, so it brings me to the tap room a lot more.
But they're comfortable environments where you feel okay hanging out for a while.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be a book club, but get creative, be a venue for your community, right?
Yeah. One of my local brewers, they have a night every night. It's Bluegrass Tuesdays and Trivia Wednesdays, and and I think breweries too are increasingly thinking about those in very strategic ways of, who are parts of the community that we're not bringing in that we could bring in through this night, and then hopefully they're going to be there on Saturday when the whole community is there, and we don't need a theme night because everybody's out drinking.
Exactly. So, I mean, that covers taproom brewers, but what else are you seeing in like large regionals?
Yeah, I mean, the regionals, I think a lot of them are really thinking about their footprint, and where they can really lean in and where they just don't make any money selling beer anymore, and it's not worth the time and effort. Obviously, we're seeing more of them look at groups and think about both that production piece. Does it make sense for me to have my own brewery, or could I be partnering with somebody and using their capacity? We're seeing more of those announcements like, hey, we're just going to produce at another, we're going to go toward more of a contract brand. That was one of the kind of cases and stories that we had heard when we changed our bylaws recently to allow contract brewers to be voting members. And some of that because we have longstanding members who are probably going to look at that model in the next couple of years of, it doesn't make sense for me to have this space, but I think my brand still has relevance in the market, so I want to keep doing it that way. So that's another thing I think we're seeing is just regionals thinking strategically around, am I better alone? Am I better in a group? Am I better producing? Kind of where does this brand actually resonate, and what is the business operation model that works best with that?
When you were talking about regionals yesterday, you brought up that like if you took out the top three, and the numbers for regionals would look a lot different. When you have some companies that can skew that data so much, what do you look at to still kind of see real trends?
Yeah, I mean, and I think you pull out some of that, right? And you can look at, there's lots of ways to slice stats, right? You look at median growth, you look at, here's what, people in different places. And as I kind of joked yesterday, you still want those breweries in, right? They're part of the category, and, you take the good numbers out, they get worse. You take the bad numbers out, they get better. But I think, you stress test it in a variety of ways. So, and this is pretty common in stats, right? What happens if we remove outliers? Does this relationship still hold? Does it look different? And I do think this year there were a little bit more kind of extreme good cases than extreme bad cases. So that's why I said it that way as opposed to the other way around. But we're kind of pushing and prodding to really understand, is this individual company versus demand? And there's lots of places we've done this for years. Style was the one for years, like, is there really double IPA growth right now, or is there just Voodoo Ranger growth? That kind of stuff. And so I've always have that mindset of stress testing, because you don't want to give a story about a category if it's really a story about a company. And like NA is a place, for example, I've been fairly clear about this. Like, I'm not sure there's huge opportunities in NA for a lot of individual companies. The category is growing, but it's being captured by a few firms, and it's still important for our members to understand that trend, what motivates it, what the consumers are doing. That doesn't mean I'm telling them they should make an NA, because there's a very few number of companies who are accumulating the vast majority of that growth.
And just the amount of money that it takes to play in that space and do everything you need to do is, just a wild amount.
Yeah. Producing NA beers is, it's just more challenging, and so you need more equipment. You got to do it different ways, and that's another place we're seeing the kind of co-packer, who can I work with, model evolve. Which it's interesting to watch that. Brewers are figuring out what works for their brands, and then they're figuring out how to make those beers in the way that works.
One of the things that you've brought up recently, well, not even recently, the last couple of years, has been just the health of draft and the need to twist those trends around. Are you seeing sort of the coalition form around that to sort of approach that in the way that it needs to be approached?
I definitely think there's a coalition of the willing who wants to work on this. I think the challenge is understanding what to do. The challenges with draft are so multifaceted. It's consumers changed, retailers changed, distributors changed, and they're all of these add up to a place where draft is not back to where it was. I think more brewers are starting to realize that they can lean in here and make a difference in their local market, which is great to see. And that was one thing I called out on stage, that I was talking to brewers who said, yeah, our draft numbers actually were really good in distribution, and we were able to lean. Some of this is, again, winners and losers with the team yesterday. I'm hearing from brewers kind of polls. If a distributor picks you as one of their draft horses, I think you can have a lot more success, because distributors have looked to simplify there. And if you're not, then it can be really challenging still. So this isn't necessarily an option for everyone. But I think there's a lot of people who are interested in working on this. I actually, in the walk here in the expo, somebody stopped me, asked me about draft, said it was great that we were talking about it. They want to help regrow it. So it's on people's minds, and And now I think we just need to figure out as a group, as an industry, what are the top couple of things we could do? Is it talking to retailers about the profitability that exists there? Is it, on the government affairs level, we're working on Cheers Act to try to, do things that we can do there. But what are the kind of top 3 levers we can pull? And I think once we all agree on what those are and figure those out, I think you'll see more action.
Awesome. One thing you mentioned, I'm not going to ask you specifics because I know cone of silence, but now that contract brewers are voting members, did you see a good amount of attendance from that group in the voting members meeting yesterday?
We saw some, that's not the highest percentage of our members, partly because of historical reasons. And so we're going to have to do outreach to that community, find out more of their needs, build more specific resources. I will say there was a lot of discussion of contract brewers and some of those things like, hey, what should we be doing differently? What are the resources we need? What are the new kind of ways that we could put out business resources to help members explore those models and what opportunities exist? So there's going to be a learning curve there for us, and it's going to take time, but excited to more fully welcome them into the association as voting members.
You touched on innovation yesterday, and you pulled out a quote, but I think it was really cool that we talk about innovation a lot, and I think we think instantly like maybe canned cocktails or Beyond Beer or something.
New products.
Yes, but innovation can be the same product if it looks new to a consumer, right?
Yeah. NA beer isn't new.
Yeah.
NA beer had a higher share back in the day, and Athletics doing it in a way that's totally different. Some of the fastest growing brands out there, they're not doing much different in terms of products, but they are marketing it, branding it very differently, and finding ways to connect with consumers. I was just, and some of these products were different. I was just on a panel on regenerative grains, talking about Fonio, Kernza, things like that. And I think that's a great example of you're still making a pale ale. The beer is not hugely different, but you're using these ingredients to talk about it in a very different way, and the way beer plays a role in agriculture and people's lives and farmers, and that's the kind of stuff where I think brewers can spend a little bit more time. And that's not to say that the product innovation isn't important as well, but brewers are crazy innovators, and we figured out lots of beer innovation, and I think we have the beers we need to go out and grow in the marketplace. And now it's about, how do we show the customer that this beer is the right beer for them in that occasion? How do we communicate that to distributors, to retailers? And that's the kind of place I think brewers can do a little bit more, and also solve just some of the craft demographics are still fairly limited. And I threw out some numbers on that, specifically, but I think there's still huge potential to take craft. That next S curve for craft is going to be even more truly into the mainstream, where craft is the everyday beer for more Americans, and that's going to mean marketing in a different way that's not around, some of the past things that have worked for craft.
Is anyone's marketing out there right now standing out to you as sort of hitting some of those notes?
That's a great question that, I'm not a marketer, so I'm maybe not the best person to ask on this, but, I think you do see people who are, they understand who they are, and they really then, they think about a product, and they think about the customer, and they try to marry those two well. And I'm lucky I get to sit, occasionally attend sales meetings for companies, and got to do that for a company a couple of years back where they were rolling out a double IPA in 19.2s, and following kind of the New Belgium path. It was not New Belgium, and they just really made it their own. It's been a successful launch. And they knew who the customer was. They were differentiating it from who was going to buy their existing one. They thought about it differently. So I think there's lots of people who are doing this, and I think we're seeing people get more sophisticated on it pretty quickly as well.
How many weeks a year are you not on an airplane?
This year I got on airplanes a lot less, which was, it's amazing what you can just do still with a phone, and did a lot more of just picking up the phone and calling members and talking to them that way. I still like to get out there. There's nothing like walking into a brewery tap room and getting to really experience what the brewery is in a different way. So I'm spending a few more weeks at home than I did in the past, but I've still got pretty good airline status.
You deserve it.
We're going to Indianapolis next year for this next CBC. What are you looking forward to for that?
First, I'm excited for people to see that as a beer city. I don't, when you think of beer cities, I don't think Indy jumps into people's heads, but there's a lot of awesome breweries there, and they make a lot of awesome beer. On a personal note, my parents live in South Bend, and South Bend also got a beer scene, but it's not quite as good as Indy. And I've been suggesting we meet up there a lot when I go to visit them. Like, hey, I'll fly into Indy. It's a direct flight. You can drive down, and we do a weekend there. So I've gotten a few weeks in Indy in the last couple of years, and a lot of great beer bars, a lot of great breweries. So I'm excited about that. I'm also excited. I think it's one of those places. Vegas has been awesome. It's been super fun. It's been fun to watch brewers. I did a run the other day, and you're still seeing brewers out on the strip at, early in the morning, let's just say. But I think Indy's going to be one of those places where you're just going to go around town and you're going to see kind of CBC take over that downtown a little bit more. And so I'm really excited to see that. Whereas here we're just lost amidst the sea that is Vegas. So
I'm not sure that you have much to do with the site selection, but what goes into figuring out a good host city for this event?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's just real logistical stuff. So, does it have a convention center that's big enough to house this amazing expo? One of the other things we're increasingly looking at is cost and price. What are the hotel rooms? Do they have enough hotel rooms? Can we get them at a price that brewers want? So that's another piece. We try to vary it geographically. We now have a scorecard that we are using for selection cities too, around making sure attendees are going to feel safe there. And then finally, and I think this has gotten de-emphasized a little bit, but for years one of the things we were thinking about, and I think this was part of why we selected Vegas, is where is a place in its beer development, and can CBC give that a little push? And maybe we were naive to think you could influence Vegas in any particular way, but we heard some criticisms around Vegas in the last year of like, well, it's not a great city for craft beer, and our response is, well, that's part of why we're going there. We want to show them what we can bring. We want to show what craft beer is, and maybe change that narrative a little bit and maybe make Vegas a slightly better place for craft beer. So I think that was part of why Indy was selected as well. Like, we're picking these things 5 years out, so it was not as good a beer city 5 years ago, and we were hoping that CBC could be part that gives it a push up.
Do you have the map after Indy? I can't remember.
Philly. I'm so excited for Philly.
Oh, yeah. So since it's out there already, Philly, 250 years, it'll be a great time to be in Philadelphia that year. And we had a great conference there when, I'm blanking on the year, but when it was, maybe 2015, 16? 17, sometime.
I feel like between 2010 and 2014.
Yeah, I'm ready for my Denix roast pork and broccoli rabe already.
It is time.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally am pushing for an after party on the Jersey Shore, but we got time.
Bart, this is always awesome. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to see all three of you.